There was a time when Turkey didn't hesitate to criticize India on international stages. Whether it was Kashmir, defense decisions, or regional conflicts, Turkish leadership positioned itself as a vocal supporter of narratives directly opposed to India's interests. They used strong language, took firm stances, and aligned themselves diplomatically with those who stood in contradiction to India's sovereignty. These weren't quiet differences, they were loud declarations. And while India maintained restraint, the words did not go unnoticed. Fast forward to today, and the tone has shifted dramatically. The same Turkey that once stood at podiums making bold statements is now rolling out red carpets for Indian tourists. Travel agencies in Turkey are tailoring packages specifically for Indians. Influencers are being invited. Promotional campaigns are being launched with Indian celebrities. Suddenly, the country that seemed so firm in its opposition now wants to be friends. But this transformation wasn't sparked by diplomacy, it was driven by desperation. With its economy suffering under high inflation, political tension, and declining tourism from Europe, Turkey is now leaning heavily on emerging travel markets, and India stands out as one of the most valuable. The Indian middle class, known for its global travel spending, has become a lifeline for struggling tourism hubs, and Turkey knows it. That's why every gesture of opposition has been replaced with a carefully worded invitation. This change reveals something deeper than policy. It reveals the power of the Indian traveler. For all the fiery speeches and anti-India rhetoric of the past, economic reality has forced a different tone. The same nation that once judged from afar is now hoping to be chosen. It's not just a shift in tourism strategy. It's a visible example of how geopolitical pride can bend when financial pressure becomes too great to ignore. You said, explain second heading without heading and without conclusion in 300 words. ChatGPT said, Turkey's tourism sector, once a jewel of its economy, is now facing serious challenges. The country had long positioned itself as a top destination, drawing millions of tourists each year to its historic landmarks, coastal resorts, and cultural experiences. But behind the scenic beauty, cracks have deepened. Skyrocketing inflation, rising political instability, and a weakening lira have all taken a toll. The cost of living for locals has surged, and the cost of attracting international tourists has grown harder with each passing year. Europe, once Turkey's largest source of tourism, has started pulling back. Ongoing diplomatic rifts, safety concerns, and changing travel trends have reduced the flow of Western tourists. At the same time, domestic pressures, economic strain, rising unemployment, and shifting leadership policies have made tourism more vital than ever to stabilize the economy. Faced with this shrinking inflow, Turkey began to look eastward. And there, shining brightly on the radar, was India. The Indian traveler is not only numerous but increasingly affluent. Over the past decade, Indians have become one of the most sought after global tourist groups, known for spending on experiences, shopping, weddings, and leisure. Countries all over the world, from Thailand to Switzerland, have tailored their hospitality to attract Indian tourists. Turkey has followed suit, but not from a position of strength. This is a pivot born out of necessity. Hotels, airlines, tour operators, and even government officials are now appealing directly to Indians, often with public relations campaigns and media partnerships. But the timing of this charm offensive hasn't gone unnoticed. Turkey's sudden warmth toward Indian travelers comes not out of cultural appreciation, but out of economic urgency. The country needs help, and Indians are the guests they hope will fill the gaps left by others who no longer arrive in the numbers they once did. You said explain third heading without heading and without conclusion in 300 words. ChatGPT said, in recent years, Indian travelers had embraced Turkey with enthusiasm. From Istanbul's grand bazaars to Cappadocia's sky, touching hot air balloons, Turkey became a dream destination for thousands of Indians seeking culture, beauty, and luxury. Indian weddings began filling Turkish resorts, film crews turned its landscapes into backdrops, and social media buzzed with Turkish vacation reels. But all of that has started to fade. A quiet, deliberate shift has taken place, not driven by government orders, but by public sentiment. A growing number of Indians are choosing not to travel to Turkey, and this decision isn't random. It's rooted in memory. Indians haven't forgotten Turkey's past diplomatic tone, particularly its vocal opposition on issues close to India's heart. When Turkey sided against India on Kashmir and echoed narratives that undermined India's sovereignty, it struck a nerve. Those words weren't just political, they felt personal to many Indians. While Turkey may have thought such stances would be forgotten with time, the Indian public remembered. And now, with their wallets and choices, they're quietly responding. This boycott isn't loud. There are no slogans, no street protests. It's a shift visible in travel data, in booking trends, in online discussions. Indians are looking elsewhere, choosing countries that respect their identity, their voice, and their values. And as this sentiment spreads, Turkey is beginning to feel the impact. Hotels are seeing fewer Indian guests. Travel agencies report changes. Even social media influencers promoting Turkish tourism face backlash. What makes this movement so powerful is its quiet strength. It's not about anger, it's about awareness. Indians are beginning to see that travel is more than vacation. It's a statement. And through their absence, they are speaking louder than any speech ever could. The message is clear. Respect matters, and memory runs deep. You said, explain forth, heading without heading and without conclusion in 300 words. ChatGPT said, in the world of international relations, official statements and political speeches often dominate the spotlight. But sometimes the most powerful form of diplomacy doesn't come from a government office. It comes from the people. That's exactly what's unfolding in the case of Turkey and the growing Indian travel boycott. It's not a policy move or a formal sanction. It's something far more impactful. Everyday Indians choosing where to spend their money and where not to. When Indian travelers began quietly withdrawing from Turkey, it wasn't just a shift in tourism. It was a financial ripple with far-reaching consequences. Each canceled trip, each redirected honeymoon, each destination wedding moved to another country represented more than just lost revenue. It was a statement. Turkey's economy, especially its tourism sector, thrives on foreign visitors, and Indian tourists had become one of the most lucrative groups. Their absence is now being felt in hotel bookings, in travel agency reports, in the empty resort halls once filled with Indian celebrations. What this moment reveals is the raw power of consumer choice. Governments may negotiate treaties and sanctions, but the people decide where the money flows. And when a nation like Turkey, once confident in its political positioning, suddenly faces economic pressure from a population it dismissed, it's a wake-up call. The shift from political disagreement to economic impact didn't require a rally or a resolution. It only required awareness and a decision. This is where politics meets wallets. India's citizens are proving that their economic behavior carries weight. They're showing that dignity, national pride, and memory can influence commerce. And for Turkey, a country now extending its hand in welcome, it's become clear that words once spoken in political forums can echo back in currency lost at the border. You said, explain fifth heading without heading and without conclusion in 300 words. ChatGPT said, Turkey's recent diplomatic approach toward India stands in stark contrast to its past rhetoric. Not long ago, Turkish leadership was openly critical of India's internal affairs, especially regarding sensitive issues like Kashmir. They aligned themselves with voices hostile to India's interests, often using international platforms to cast judgment and stir controversy. These were not mere political disagreements. They were public condemnations that many Indians perceived as deeply disrespectful. And yet today, that same leadership is presenting a different face, one of warmth, hospitality, and eagerness to welcome Indian travelers. This sudden shift has revealed a clear double standard. When it was politically convenient, Turkey chose to speak out against India, disregarding diplomatic decorum and long-term relationships. But as their tourism economy falters and global travel patterns shift, those bold criticisms have faded into silence, replaced by tourism campaigns and desperate outreach. What was once principled defiance is now carefully staged friendliness. It raises a question: was the original stance ever about principle at all, or simply performance? The contradiction has not gone unnoticed. Indians, increasingly aware of their global influence, are beginning to see through the surface of diplomacy. They recognize when a handshake is offered only after financial pressure sets in. Respect for them is not just about current gestures, it's about consistent behavior. Turkey's past words cannot be easily erased by today's invitations. This pattern of selective diplomacy, where criticism turns into flattery only when money is at stake, strikes a nerve. It makes people question sincerity. It forces them to examine whether hospitality is genuine or transactional. And it sends a message to other nations as well. You can't criticize with one hand and cash in with the other. Actions matter, but so do the intentions that came before them, especially when the world is watching both. You said, explain sixth heading without heading and without conclusion in 300 words. ChatGPT said, India is waking up to its own power, not just in politics or defense, but in the choices of its people. For decades, Indians traveled the world, spent generously, and contributed significantly to global tourism economies, often without realizing the weight their presence carried. But times have changed. Today, more Indians are aware that where they go, where they spend, and how they engage as consumers has global impact. Turkey is one of the first to feel the shift, but it won't be the last. The realization began quietly. As Turkey's tourism sector struggled and its outreach to Indian travelers intensified, it became clear that Indian visitors were no longer just guests. They were a lifeline. With European arrivals declining and local economic pressures mounting, Turkey began to target Indian tourists with tailor-made campaigns, luxury packages, and cultural programs. But this time, Indians weren't just reacting with excitement, they were asking questions. Questions about past political positions, about how India was treated when global narratives were shaped, and about whether their welcome now was rooted in respect or simply revenue. This growing awareness is reshaping global expectations. Indians are no longer content to be treated as passive tourists. They want acknowledgement, respect, and genuine engagement. Their travel choices are becoming tools of soft power, sending messages not just about where they prefer to visit, but about what values they expect to see reflected in those destinations. What makes this shift so significant is that it's coming from the ground up. It's not a directive from a ministry, it's a collective awakening, and it's teaching countries around the world that the Indian voice isn't just found in speeches and politics. It's found in decisions, bookings, cancellations, and the quiet but unmistakable message that respect must precede invitation. You said, explain seventh heading without heading and without conclusion in 300 words. ChatGPT said, Turkey's sudden warmth toward Indian tourists may appear like a gesture of friendship, but beneath the surface lies a calculated strategy. This shift in tone didn't arise from a change of heart. It came from a need. Faced with economic challenges and a shrinking tourism sector, Turkey has turned toward India not with diplomacy, but with disguised desperation. Their embrace isn't rooted in mutual respect, it's rooted in survival. The smiles at the airport, the targeted ads, and the cultural showcases are all part of a campaign, carefully crafted to attract Indian wallets, not necessarily Indian hearts. This isn't the first time such behavior has been seen on the global stage. Countries that once criticized or distanced themselves from India often reappear with friendly gestures when economic tides turn. In Turkey's case, the turnaround has been especially sharp. A nation that once used its voice to oppose India on international platforms is now offering incentives and extending invitations. But hospitality, when driven by crisis rather than conviction, loses its sincerity. People can sense when a welcome isn't genuine, when diplomatic gestures are only extended after political damage has been done. Trust becomes harder to rebuild. Turkey may be adjusting its approach, but the timing and tone reveal more than intended. It's not about building bridges, it's about filling hotel rooms. The marketing campaigns, the curated itineraries, and the symbolic efforts to connect cultures feel less like reconciliation and more like negotiation. This is diplomacy in disguise, an economic move dressed in cultural clothing. And while it may succeed in attracting some travelers, a growing number of Indians are not so easily convinced. They remember what was said before the cameras were turned off, and they know the difference between a sincere welcome and a well-rehearsed pitch when survival is on the line. You said, "Give me conclusion of this entire speech, also a good luck, and thank you message in 100 words," ChatGPT said. Turkey's changing tone toward India isn't about newfound friendship, it's about necessity. A country that once stood in opposition is now extending invitations not from respect, but from economic urgency. And India, through its quiet, collective choices, is showing the world that dignity cannot be discounted. This is more than a travel trend. It's a reminder that respect must be mutual and actions have consequences. When a nation remembers its worth, the world begins to treat it differently. Thank you for watching with an open mind. May your choices always reflect your values. Stay aware, stay proud, and good luck wherever your journey leads.